me. I hear what the elders talked about back then. Even just last night, there's a sign that's to come before the third shaking of the earth, which I'm going to get to. I'll explain what all these mean. Last night on the news, they were talking about it. We'll come up to that. They say at the beginning of each cycle of time, the Great Spirit comes down through a messenger. He makes a strong appearance upon the earth. And we are coming to an end of a cycle now. It's not the first cycle. There was a cycle of spirit. There was a cycle of the mineral, the rock. There was a cycle of the plant. And now we're in the cycle of the animal, coming to the end of that and beginning the cycle of the human being. When we get into the cycle of the human being, the highest and greatest powers that we have will be released to us and be released from that light or soul that we carry to the mind. But right now we're coming to the end of the animal cycle when we have investigated ourselves and learned what it is to be like an animal on this earth. And at the beginning of this cycle of time, long ago, the Great Spirit came down and He made an appearance. He gathered the peoples of the earth together. They say on an island that is now beneath the water. And He said to the human beings, He said, I'm going to send you to 4 directions. And over time, I'm going to change you to 4 colors. But I'm going to give you some teachings, and you will call these the original teachings. And when you come back together with each other, you will share these so that you can live and have peace on earth, and a great civilization will come about. And He said, during this cycle of time, I'm going to give each of you 2 stone tablets. And He said, when I give you those stone tablets, don't cast them upon the ground. Because if any of the brothers and sisters of the 4 directions and the 4 colors cast their stone tablets on the ground, not only will the human beings have a hard time, but almost the earth itself would die. And so He gave us each a responsibility, and we call that the guardianship. And to the Indian people, the red people, He gave the guardianship of the earth. And we were to learn during this cycle of time the teachings of the earth and the plants that grow from the earth and the foods that you can eat and the herbs that are healing. So that when we came back together with the other brothers and sisters, we could share this knowledge with them, because something good was to happen on the earth. And to the south, He gave the yellow race of people the guardianship of the wind. And they were to learn about the sky and breathing and how to take that within ourselves for spiritual advancement. And they were to share that with us in this time. And to the west, where there's blackness of night, He gave the black race of people the guardianship of the water. And they were to learn the teachings of the water, which is the chief of the elements. It is the most humble and also the most powerful. When I went to the University of Washington and learned that it was a black man that invented blood plasma, it didn't surprise me, because blood is water. And the elders already told me that black people will bring the teachings of water to humanity. And to the north, where there's white snow on this continent, He gave the white race of people the guardianship of the fire. And if you look at the center of many of the things they do, you will find the fire in this light bulb. They say that is a white man's fire. If you look at the center of a car, you will find a spark. If you look at the center of the airplane, the train, you will find the fire. And the fire moves, also consumes. This is why it was the white brothers and sisters that began to move upon the face of the earth and reunite us as a human family, because they had the guardianship of the fire. This was their responsibility. And so a long time passed, and the Great Spirit gave each of the 4 races 2 stone tablets. Ours are kept at the Hopi Reservation in Arizona, at 4 Corners area on 3rd Mesa. I've talked to people from the black race of people. Their stone tablets are at the foot of Mount Kenya. They are kept by the Kikuyu tribe. I once had the honor of presenting a sacred pipe of the Kikuyu tribe carved from the red pipestone of Mount Kenya. One time I was at an Indian spiritual gathering about 15 years ago, and a medicine man from South Dakota put a beaded medicine wheel in the middle of the gathering, and it had the 4 colors in the 4 directions. And he asked the people, where is this from? And they said, oh, probably Montana, South Dakota, maybe Saskatchewan. He said, this is from Kenya. It was beaded just like ours, same colors. The stone tablets of the yellow race of people are kept by the Tibetans in Tibet. And the guardians of the traditions of the people of Europe are the Swiss. In Switzerland, they still have the mask day when each family brings out its mask. They still know the colors of their families. They still know their symbols, some of them. I went to school with some people at the University of Washington from Switzerland, and they shared this with me. Each of these four keepers happened to be people that live in the mountains. If you went straight through the Hopi reservation to the other side of the world, you would come out in Tibet. The Tibetan word for sun is the Hopi word for moon, and the Hopi word for moon is the Tibetan word for sun, because they're on the opposite sides of the world. It was some people from the yellow race of people. In 1976, because the United States was celebrating 200 years of freedom, they're having this bicentennial. Some of the Native people thought this was significant, and they carried a sacred pipe bundle from the west coast to the east coast of this land. And I particularly I was thinking last night as we were having a circle out here about this. They said that the roads of this land would either go north-south or they would go east-west. If they went north-south, we would come together as brothers and sisters. But if they went east-west, there would be destruction, and almost the earth itself would have a hard time. So you all know the roads went east-west. They said things then would be lost from the east to the west and the north to the south, but they would come back from the west to the east and come back from the north to the south. They would be lost from the south to the north. So 9 years ago, in 1976, from the west to the east coast of this land, from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., people carried a sacred pipe bundle by hand on foot across this land. My aunt had dreamt 15 years earlier, and her dream was in a book that people would throw rocks and bottles at that pipe bundle as they carried it across the land. People that didn't like them. Sure enough, that came about. People threw, but as my aunt seen it in her dream, that it only come so far, and then they dropped, and nothing touched it. When they got up to the top of the Rockies, they hit a hard storm, and there was an elder man. He had long white hair. He said, I will carry it now. And they had a van, and then they had people walking by the van carrying that bundle, and then the old man got out of the van. He carried it clear through that storm. He was so cold when he got back in the van that somebody touched his hair and it fell. His hair was frozen. You have to be really cold for your hair to freeze, but that old man carried it through that storm, because they said if we carried this bundle across the earth, the powers would begin to come back. It was carried from west to east. They said a spiritual fire would be lit in the north, and it would come down the northwest coast of this land, and when it gets to Puget Sound, it will go inland. I think this 9 years later is the gathering in the north myself. That's why I came here. This is it. We have the capacity to start the spiritual fire now here. The old people long ago seen it and foretold it, and I'm going to come to that. So we went through the cycle of time. Each of the four races went to their directions and they learned their teachings. It was in Newsweek magazine not too long ago that 8 out of 10 foods that people eat on the earth were developed here in the Western Hemisphere, because that was our guardianship, to learn the teachings of the earth and the things that grow from the earth. And we were given a sacred handshake to show when we came back together as brothers and sisters that we remembered the teachings. And it was indicated on the stone tablets that the Hopis had, that the first brothers and sisters that would come back to them would come as turtles across the land. They would be human beings, but they would come as turtles. So when the time came close, the Hopis built a special village to welcome the turtles that would come across the land, and they got up in the morning and looked out at sunrise, and they looked out across the desert and they saw the Spanish conquistadors coming covered in armor like turtles across the land. So this was them. So they went out to the Spanish man and they extended their hand, hoping for the handshake, but into the hand the Spanish man dropped a trinket. And so word spread throughout North America that it was going to be a hard time, that maybe some of the brothers and sisters had forgot the sacredness of all things, and all the human beings were going to suffer for this on it. The earth as we know it is going to change. Each of us carry, I believe, a sacred drop of light. In the Indian teachings, they say it takes 9 ancestors to agree before conception can occur. 9 ancestors of the husband or the wife have to come together in the spiritual realm and say, we will bring life before a woman can become pregnant. At that time, the soul was formed. I delivered my first daughter, and a man from the blood reserve who went to South Dakota and was the first blood to pierce for, in 82 years, he came to my house by coincidence 4 days before my wife went into labor. Each night we had a ceremony. And on the morning after the 4th ceremony, my wife went into labor at sunrise. And that night, at sunset, the daughter was born. And I took her out and I cut the cord, and I noticed that at the Sundance that the Lakota people do in South Dakota, they pass that pipe 3 times and they don't take it in the 4th time. And even in Washington, I've heard the coming of a child is like the coming of a new pipe. And when I was delivering my daughter, I had to notice that the skull came out 3 times. And on the 4th time, her head came out like the coming of a pipe. So I took her out and I cleaned her up and I washed her, and first I put her on the mother instantly. But then after a few minutes, I washed her up. There was a circle of people just about like this around my wife and praying, and people with different backgrounds. And we looked up, and through the ceiling came a small drop of blue light. When it got close to the child, we could not see it. That was her soul. She would carry that light throughout earth. In that is her special uniqueness as a being, her spiritual power. In that are gifts. After we go through, and then we carry it back here, and it radiates to the mind, but for some reason in this cycle, we've been in the lower natures, the animal part, but now we're going into the human world. The mind is going to be opened up to the radiance of that, our own soul. And the cycle of the human beings is going to come about. And something so good is going to happen on this earth it cannot even be described. The elders say it in different ways. They say something like this. They say, there will be grass at that time when they make that circle and bring the peace on the earth. There will be blades of grass that have not quite come through the earth. Even they will try to push themselves up to be part of that day when the sun rises. The elders are saying it like this. They say, out here outside this building, long before there was a fairgrounds here, there were Native people. They say many of these Native people in different tribes, they were aware of these things, and they told their children. Their children grew up. You know, one time the people came from the Hopis, scientists came to the Hopis, and they said, we want to take a piece of the stone tablets. Or they said, we want to take the stone tablets to a scientific laboratory to determine how old they are. The Hopi said, we know how old they are. Well, the scientist says, we want to confirm it. Well, the Hopis let them take a little piece, and they did that, the carbon dating method. They found these tablets were at least 10,000 years old, maybe 50. So when I say thousands of years ago there were Native people that spoke of these things, that's exactly what I mean. They told their children. And thousands of years ago their children grew up and told their children. And then their children grew up and told their children. And they spoke about the people that would live at this time, and now it is us. We are the ones they spoke of long ago. They say to be allowed to become into creation and live upon the earth at this time is a great honor. In the cycle of time, from the beginning to the end, this time that we're in now will change the purification of all things. They say this is the hardest time to live, but it's also the greatest honor to be allowed to live and see this. In the state of Washington in 1855, they signed treaties and made 22 Indian reservations. They wanted to do it before there was problems. They thought they were advanced at the time. They had learned from what had happened elsewhere. They made 22 Indian reservations, and the elders spoke in 1855, and they said, we're going to become weaker, and you're going to become stronger, and if you wish to break these treaties, you may do so. They said that there's going to come a time when the earth itself will rise up and purify itself, and this will be announced. It will be announced by the speaking of one of 16 great ones on the west coast of this land. And when the first of the 16 great ones speaks, the purification will have begun. It was a little over 5 years ago when Mount St. Helens, one of the 16 great volcanoes on the west coast of this land, spoke. The Seattle Times did a special interest story. They went over to Watson Totus and Woodrow Bill. Bill's son that made this hoop that I brought here today, my good brother Randolph Bill. They asked Watson Totus and Woodrow Bill, as spiritual people of the Yakima Nation, what does this mean? What they said was so profound that they didn't put it on page 16, they put it on the front page of the Seattle Times. They said this means that the races and nations of the earth should slow down and come together and talk to each other. That's exactly what it meant. And we had 4 years and 4 days to do that. 4 years and 4 days later, Mount St. Helens were off the second time. That was last spring, just about this time. That was our grace period. We could have still done something really good, but now things are going to speed up. Now things are going to really happen fast. Time is going to go so fast. The more we share the message, the more we will cushion the third shaking of the earth, and the easier it will be on ourselves and others. A good friend of mine in Montana, his grandmother just passed away last year. The last thing she said to him was, make a place for yourself in the mountains, because the air would become so hot down here where they were at on the reservation. It would be hard to breathe. And it won't be long. That's the last thing she told her grandson when she was passing. Go on the mountains and make a place for yourself. Put some things there that you can survive with. The people are going to run to the mountains to survive, and the native people must be ready for this. And I know Eugene is going to speak, and I'm only going to speak a little bit longer. He said something that profoundly affected me several years ago at the class gathering about how important it is for Native people to get ready, because it's not going to be long, and they're going to turn to Native people, and they're going to turn to local spiritual assemblies. I know there's a lot of local spiritual assemblies that don't meet, and they think, well, we don't really have that much business, but it's not going to be long. The earth is going to turn to you. Blackout, I believe, foresaw this, and he said there will be a hoop of many hoops that will circle the world. So this is that time. We are now within the purification of all things. Non-natives call this the apocalypse. The native elders call this the purification. I want to share one non-native prophecy with you. There was a prophet, or a seer, not a prophet, but a seer in Europe. His name was Nostradamus. I'm sure many of you have heard of him. He foresaw 3 great shakings of the earth. He said the third shaking would begin when Lesser Arabia and Persia engaged in a war. 5 years ago, when Mount St. Helens went off, Iraq attacked Iran. Lesser Arabia today is called Iraq. Persia is called Iran. These two prophecies coincide. Both the native elders and Nostradamus said this will start slowly, almost unnoticed by the peoples of the earth, but it will eventually involve us all. Eventually the gourds of ashes will fall from the sky so much that the river that runs through the center of this Turtle Island, the Mississippi River, will boil from the heat of the gourds of ashes that will fall on this land. But don't despair. It sounds terrible, but we will survive it. We will live through it. I don't think anyone chosen to live through it, but some people will. So, in closing, I would like to call on each and every person, regardless of who you are, young or old, native or non-native, to arise now and to awake, to embrace this time, to learn everything you can about the teachings and the writings, to arise and awake and go forth, all the peoples of the earth,